Have you ever wanted to recreate one of those backgrounds that you see on social media, only to realize it was done with distress sprays and you don't own any? Well, don't throw in the crafty towel just yet, because I'm here to teach you how to get a similar look with distress inks. And you may be surprised because it's easier than you think. Let's get into it. I have to be honest. When I sat down to create this project, I really didn't have any idea what I was going to make. I just wanted to try out a color combination I was inspired by, and it gave me a chance to break out my new Lumberjack Plaid Distress color. One of the most important things you need to remember if you want to achieve this distress spray look is paper. Paper is everything. I suggest using Distress Heavystock. It can hold up to all of the color and water I throw at it. You're not going to be able to achieve this look if you're using a really cheap cardstock. I'm using a distress tag for my project, and I'm going to start off with blending out some distress ink. I put down the media grip onto my glass mat because I really like how it holds the ink pad in place. I started off with some spiced marmalade, and then I'm going to go in with the Lumberjack Plaid, and these ink blenders I'm using are just really cheap ones that I found on Amazon. You can find the full supply list as well as a link to the video I got the inspiration from in the description box below. In order to get the illusion that you use sprays, you do need to saturate the paper with a lot of ink. So I'm going to build up the color with my blending tools, and the last color I'm going to use is Uncharted Mariner. Now I want to let you know, in the video that I was inspired by Ardith, she used Catherine Polar inks, and I didn't have the colors that she used, so I decided to look through my stash and find some inks that would closely match. And I'm actually going to be talking about that in an upcoming video, breaking free of supply FOMO, so be on the lookout for that. Now you really don't need to worry too much if the colors aren't blending perfectly, because the next step will help blend all of those colors together. I am making sure that I get as much ink as possible onto my paper, and that's really important because we're going to start adding lots of water. I am going to spray some water into my hand and then splatter it onto the background. I want a good amount of larger spots of water and little splatters. This is going to help give the look that we use sprays. I'm also going to spray water directly onto the tag in a few little areas so the color pulls up just like it would if I use sprays. I'm going to let the inks react to the water for just a second, and then I'm going to take a paper towel and pick up some of the excess water. I'm not going to pick up all of the water because I'm going to dry some in place, and this is going to add a lot of depth to the background. Another thing you need to remember when creating a background like this is layers. We blended out the ink onto the tag, then the water spots, and now we're going to add some splatters with the same colors that we used before to blend. You can do this by smushing your ink onto a non-porous surface. I like to use a Glassboard Studio mat, and then you're going to spritz the color with some water, and then with a paintbrush you can mix the water and color together and splatter with it. Even though it's hard to see the tone on tone in the video, it really adds a lot of texture and creates depth on the background. I don't think I can stress enough how important all of these layers are, so I thought I would show you a background that has minimal water splatter so you could see the difference. Now there is nothing wrong with this, but if you're wanting a background with lots of texture and depth, more is better in this case. So add more splatters, add more layers, add more texture like we're going to do with some stamping. I like to add subtle stamping, and my go-to stamp is the script ledger stamp from Holtz. It is very well loved, and it's also important to use permanent ink. I like to use Archival ink, and I also like to stamp off just so I get a more blended look. And I don't stamp perfect, so I like to curl the stamp and it gives uneven texture on the background. Once the stamping is done, I like to dry it with my heat tool before moving on to the next step. I'm going to be doing some heat embossing on this tag, so I'm using my anti-static tool to help prevent any of the embossing powder getting anywhere that I don't want it to. I'm also using my MISTI so that I can stamp it twice if I need to, and in this case I actually did. It didn't get one of the centers of the flowers. I also really like this Stampendable tool. It really helps give even pressure all over the stamp to, again, help ensure that we're getting a good impression. Now I'm going to sprinkle on some super fine white embossing powder from Ranger. This is my favorite. It's super detailed and it's perfect for these really fine lined stamps. The stamp I'm using is from Sweet and Sassy. It's called Blooming Anemones. Now I'm going to melt that embossing powder, and I'm using this Wagner heat tool. It's one of my favorites that I've ever owned. And again, all of the supplies will be listed in the description box. I felt like this tag was missing a little oomph, so I decided to add some gold splatters with this Julie watercolors. I can only afford the dot cards, but honestly, it's enough for me because I don't watercolor too much, and as you could see, these dot cards aren't like any other dot cards that I've ever purchased in the past, like the Daniel Smith. There is a ton of color on the cards, and the shimmer to these watercolors are gorgeous. Once the watercolors are dry, I'm going to add the key to make this whole tag pop, and it's going to be Distress Micro Glaze. I like to add it using a dome blending tool. A little bit goes a long way, and this small container changed my whole creative process in the best way possible because it seals the background just enough so I can add some white splatters, and it just brings all of the layers and colors and textures to life. Now I'm going to add some black ink around the edges to help frame the flower. I do this with a finger dauber, and I'm going to be using some Archival ink. I'm able to blend out the ink with my finger because of the glaze we used, so the black isn't so harsh. Now I'm going to be adding some splatters with the Dina Wakley Gloss Spray in white. This is by far my favorite to use when adding white splatters to my projects. I'm going to add a quick sentiment using a sticker, and although I absolutely love how this tag turned out, I still love using my sprays more. So if you have sprays and are just too scared to use them, check out this short playlist where I will help you gain the confidence you need to actually start using them.